The day Adrian Cross fired Luca Bennett in front of the entire boardroom was the same day he unknowingly destroyed his own future. The silence inside Cross Holdings' executive conference room felt heavier than the Manhattan skyline outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Every department head sat perfectly still, avoiding eye contact as Adrian stood at the head of the polished walnut table, his expression colder than anyone had ever seen. The quarterly security breach had already cost the company millions. Confidential negotiations had somehow leaked to a competitor, and every piece of manipulated evidence pointed toward one person: Luca Bennett, Adrian's quiet, dependable executive assistant. The man who had worked beside him for 3 years without asking for recognition. The man who always remembered every meeting, every birthday, every impossible deadline before anyone else did. Luca stood with trembling hands wrapped around a slim folder, his heartbeat pounding so loudly he barely heard the accusations filling the room. He searched Adrian's face, waiting for the smallest sign that the CEO knew him better than this. Waiting for him to ask a single question. Waiting for him to believe him. But Adrian never looked at him with the warmth that had quietly begun to grow during countless late nights at the office. He only saw another betrayal. Cross Holdings cannot tolerate dishonesty, Adrian said, his voice calm enough to make every word hurt even more. Your employment ends today. A gasp rippled through the room before disappearing into stunned silence. Luca felt dozens of eyes settle on him, some sympathetic, others quietly satisfied. His badge suddenly felt heavier around his neck. His carefully built career collapsed in less than a minute. He wanted to defend himself. He wanted to explain that he had spent the previous night protecting confidential files, not leaking them. He wanted to tell Adrian that someone inside the executive team had been manipulating records for weeks. Instead, he realized something far more painful. Adrian had already made his decision long before this meeting began. Slowly, Luca unclipped his employee badge and placed it on the conference table. The tiny plastic card echoed far louder than it should have. I didn't betray you, he said softly, finally meeting Adrian's eyes. I hope one day you learn the truth. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Luca turned and walked toward the glass doors with as much dignity as he could manage, refusing to let anyone see the tears threatening to fall. Behind him, the meeting resumed almost immediately, spreadsheets replacing humanity as though his entire existence had been erased with a single signature. 40 minutes later, the elevator carried Luca down 48 floors toward the lobby. He hugged the small cardboard box holding his family photo, a coffee mug, and the notebook where he had written every impossible request Adrian had ever handed him. Rain greeted him the moment the revolving doors opened, soaking the sidewalks and turning the city into a blur of gray reflections. He walked 3 blocks before finally stopping beneath a pharmacy awning, struggling to catch his breath as an unexpected wave of dizziness swept over him. At first, he blamed the stress. Then he remembered the appointment he had nearly forgotten. With shaking hands, he checked the reminder on his phone. The clinic. Today. 2 hours later, Luca sat alone in a quiet examination room, staring at the doctor's gentle expression while the words refused to make sense. Mr. Bennett, the doctor said carefully, the test is positive. Luca blinked. Positive? You're going to have a baby. Every sound around him disappeared. Outside the window, traffic continued moving through the city as if nothing had changed. Somewhere across Manhattan, Adrian Cross was probably finishing the meeting that had ended Luca's career. Neither of them knew that the future they had just lost together had already begun. Luca Bennett walked out of the clinic carrying a thin white envelope that somehow felt heavier than the cardboard box he had carried out of Cross Holdings. He stood on the sidewalk while the afternoon rain softened into a light drizzle, watching strangers hurry past with umbrellas and grocery bags, completely unaware that his entire life had changed twice in a single day. He looked down at the printed ultrasound appointment tucked inside the envelope and whispered a sentence that no one else could hear. I will protect you. He did not know exactly how he would do it. His savings would barely cover a few months of rent in his tiny Brooklyn apartment. His health insurance would disappear at the end of the month. The career he had spent years building had vanished before lunch. Yet the fear growing inside him was quietly matched by something even stronger: determination. The next several days became a blur of unanswered job applications, sleepless nights, and constant calculations. Every dollar suddenly mattered. Every subway ride, every cup of coffee, every grocery receipt became another reminder that someone else now depended on him. He avoided the business news because Adrian Cross seemed to appear everywhere. Magazine covers praised the brilliant young chief executive who had acted decisively during a corporate crisis. Financial analysts applauded his leadership. Television interviews celebrated his discipline and confidence. Luca could not bring himself to turn the channel fast enough. The world admired the man who had broken his heart without ever realizing it. Across the East River, Adrian believed he had finally restored order inside Cross Holdings. The board congratulated him for removing the suspected source of the leak. Investors regained confidence, and the company's stock slowly recovered. Everything should have felt like a victory. Instead, an uncomfortable silence settled over his office after everyone left each evening. Luca's desk remained empty outside the executive suite. No neatly organized schedule waited on his tablet every morning. No handwritten reminder appeared beside his morning coffee before his first meeting. Adrian found himself reaching for the office phone more than once before remembering there was no one left to answer with the familiar calm voice that had quietly become part of every workday. He convinced himself that he simply missed efficiency. Nothing more. Late one evening, while reviewing archived correspondence, Adrian noticed something unusual. Several confidential files had been opened from an executive account during hours when Luca had been attending meetings with him in another building. The timestamps overlapped in a way that should have been impossible. He frowned and opened another report. Then another. Tiny inconsistencies began forming an uncomfortable pattern. They were not proof, but they were enough to plant a dangerous question in his mind. What if he had trusted the wrong evidence? Before he could investigate further, the chairman called with urgent news. A major merger partner demanded an emergency meeting after receiving another anonymous leak. Whoever had stolen company information had not disappeared with Luca. They were still inside the building. Adrian slowly leaned back in his chair as the realization settled over him. For the first time since the board meeting, doubt replaced certainty. Meanwhile, Luca accepted temporary freelance design work from a small architectural studio, simply to keep paying his bills. The salary was modest, but his new supervisor welcomed him without asking uncomfortable questions about why he had suddenly left one of the most prestigious companies in New York. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to breathe. That fragile peace lasted exactly until Friday afternoon, when a black luxury sedan stopped outside the studio entrance. Every employee looked toward the window as a familiar figure stepped onto the sidewalk wearing the same tailored charcoal coat Luca had seen hundreds of times before. Adrian Cross had come in person, and the expression on his face made it painfully clear that this was no ordinary business visit. The entire studio fell silent the moment Adrian Cross stepped through the glass doors. Conversations stopped in the middle of sentences. Computer keyboards went quiet. Even the receptionist forgot to answer the ringing telephone as every curious pair of eyes followed the powerful chief executive across the lobby. Luca felt his stomach tighten. He had imagined this meeting 100 different ways, but never here, never in front of people who had only recently welcomed him without judgment. Adrian stopped a few feet away, his steady blue eyes resting on Luca with an intensity that made everything else disappear. "May we speak?" he asked, his voice lower than Luca remembered. Luca folded his arms. "I am working." Adrian glanced toward the studio manager. Before Luca could say another word, the older man smiled nervously and nodded. "Take all the time you need, Luca. We can finish the presentation later." Outside, the black sedan waited beside the curb while a driver stood respectfully near the rear door. Several pedestrians slowed their pace, recognizing the famous business leader from financial magazines and morning television. Luca noticed the attention immediately and took a cautious step backward. "I do not want a scene," he said quietly. Adrian noticed the gathering crowd as well. Without hesitation, he removed his tailored overcoat and held it slightly between Luca and the growing number of phones beginning to point in their direction. It was a simple gesture, but it shielded Luca from curious cameras without touching him. "No one is taking your picture today," Adrian said calmly. "I will not allow it." The unexpected protection unsettled Luca even more than the confrontation itself. This was not the cold executive who had dismissed him without listening. Before Luca could respond, a young reporter hurried across the sidewalk. "Mr. Cross, is your former assistant involved in the investigation?" Adrian turned before the question could reach Luca again. His expression became firm enough to silence the reporter instantly. Mr. Bennett is a private citizen. Leave him out of your story. The reporter apologized and stepped away. Luca stared at Adrian, unable to understand why the same man who had publicly ended his career was now quietly protecting his dignity. They entered a nearby coffee shop where the afternoon crowd provided enough background noise to keep their conversation private. Adrian placed a thick envelope on the table. I reopened the investigation, he said. Someone accessed confidential files while you were with me during meetings. The evidence against you no longer makes sense. Luca looked at the envelope, but made no effort to touch it. You believed it before. Adrian lowered his eyes for a brief moment. Yes, I did. The admission hung heavily between them. It was not an apology, but it was the first crack in the wall Adrian had built around himself. Luca slowly pushed the envelope back across the table. You cannot repair trust with paperwork. Adrian accepted the rejection without argument. Instead, he reached inside his jacket and placed a small silver key beside the envelope. That is not severance. It is access to a secure apartment owned by the company. I believe whoever framed you may still think you know something. Until I uncover the truth, I want you somewhere safer. Luca almost laughed at the irony. After everything that happened, you expect me to trust you enough to accept your protection? Adrian did not answer immediately. He simply slid another item across the table. It was an executive security report listing unusual surveillance near Luca's apartment over the previous week, including photographs of the same unfamiliar sedan parked nearby on 3 separate nights. Luca felt the color leave his face. He had noticed the vehicle, but convinced himself it belonged to a neighbor. Someone has been watching you, Adrian said quietly. I do not know why yet, but I intend to find out before they reach you first. As Luca stared at the photographs, his phone vibrated inside his pocket. An unknown number had sent a single message. Stop asking questions if you want your secret to stay hidden. Beneath the words was a recent photograph of him leaving the medical clinic, and for the first time since walking away from Cross Holdings, Luca realized that someone else might already know about the child he had told no one about. The anonymous message stayed on Luca Bennett's phone long after the screen went dark, but he never showed it to Adrian Cross. Fear settled quietly beneath his calm expression as he slipped the device back into his pocket and forced himself to breathe normally. Whoever had taken that photograph knew exactly where he had been and exactly what secret he was carrying. Adrian noticed the sudden change in Luca's face immediately. What happened? He asked. Luca shook his head. Nothing I can prove. Adrian studied him for another moment before accepting the answer. Then let me prove it instead. 2 days later, Cross Holdings hosted its annual Leadership Foundation Gala at one of Manhattan's largest hotels. Every major investor, board member, financial reporter, and corporate partner filled the grand ballroom beneath crystal chandeliers. Adrian had planned to attend alone until the investigation uncovered another anonymous threat directed toward Luca. The security team recommended keeping Luca somewhere visible rather than leaving him isolated. Adrian made a decision that surprised even his own legal advisors. He invited Luca to attend the gala as his personal guest under company protection. Luca resisted at first. After everything that happened, people will think I am trying to get my job back. Adrian answered with quiet certainty. People will think whatever they choose. I am responsible for correcting my mistakes. When they entered the ballroom together, conversation slowed almost instantly. Curious eyes followed them across the polished marble floor. Whispered speculation spread from table to table faster than the string quartet could finish its first song. Luca recognized several former co-workers lowering their voices as he walked past. Some looked sympathetic. Others openly questioned why Adrian had brought back the man everyone believed had betrayed the company. Before Luca could retreat toward the nearest exit, another familiar voice stopped him. I knew you would find your way back somehow. Victor Hale, the company's chief financial officer, smiled politely as he approached with a glass of sparkling water in one hand. His smile looked warm enough for photographers, yet his eyes carried something far colder. It takes confidence to return after everything that happened. Luca met his gaze without answering. Victor leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound friendly. Some people simply cannot let go of powerful connections. Several nearby guests heard enough to exchange uncomfortable glances. The implication was obvious. Luca felt the old humiliation rising again, this time in front of hundreds of influential people. Before he could respond, Adrian stepped forward. With perfect composure. "Mr. Hale," he said evenly, "if you have concerns about my invited guest, you may address them through me." I approved his presence personally. Victor's smile tightened. "I was only making conversation." "Then allow me to improve it," Adrian replied. "Mr. Bennett is here because I asked him to be here. Any disrespect shown toward him should be understood as disrespect toward me." The ballroom grew noticeably quieter. No one expected Adrian to speak so directly, especially not in front of investors and reporters. Victor gave a polite nod before excusing himself, but the confidence in his expression had vanished. Lucas stared at Adrian, surprised by the calm certainty in his voice. There had been no raised voices, no dramatic confrontation, only a clear line that no one seemed willing to cross afterward. As the evening continued, Adrian remained quietly nearby without hovering, allowing Luca to move freely while subtly ensuring no one cornered him with uncomfortable questions. It was the kind of protection that demanded nothing in return. Later that night, an elderly board member approached Adrian with a puzzled expression. "You seem remarkably determined to defend him," the man observed. Adrian looked across the ballroom, where Luca stood speaking with one of the charity organizers, finally smiling for the first time that evening. "Some mistakes," Adrian answered softly, "become impossible to ignore once you understand what they cost." At that exact moment, Luca's phone vibrated again. Another anonymous message appeared. This one contained only 6 words. "He still does not know the baby exists." Luca quietly locked the screen before anyone else could see it, but across the ballroom, Victor Hale happened to glance in his direction. The faint smile returning to the chief financial officer's face made Luca realize the danger surrounding him had never been about losing his career. It had always been about protecting a secret someone else intended to use first. The anonymous messages haunted Luca Bennett long after the charity gala ended. He replayed every strange glance, every carefully chosen word, and every smile Victor Hale had offered that evening until exhaustion blurred the memories together. Sleep refused to come. Instead, he found himself sitting beside the apartment window before sunrise, staring at the quiet Manhattan streets, while one impossible question repeated itself inside his mind. Who already knew about the baby? Across the city, Adrian Cross had reached the same conclusion. The threats were no longer random. Someone inside Cross Holdings possessed information that should have been impossible to obtain. Early the next morning, he instructed the company's private security division to investigate every executive with access to personnel records, medical insurance databases, and confidential communications. Hours later, an encrypted report arrived on his desk. The findings did not identify the person sending the messages, but they revealed something equally disturbing. For nearly 5 years, Victor Hale had secretly controlled several shell companies that regularly conducted business with Cross Holdings without full disclosure to the board. The transactions themselves appeared legal, yet the pattern suggested a hidden network operating quietly behind the corporation's public image. Adrian requested every available file. One document immediately caught his attention. Years before Adrian became chief executive officer, Victor had negotiated a private succession agreement with Adrian's late grandfather. Buried within dozens of pages was a forgotten clause granting Victor temporary authority over voting shares if Adrian ever became publicly discredited during his first decade as chief executive. Suddenly, every recent event looked different. The security breach, the false evidence, Luca's dismissal, even the anonymous threats. None of it had been about corporate espionage alone. Someone had been carefully removing Adrian's most trusted ally while quietly weakening his position inside the company. Adrian immediately drove to meet Luca. He found him leaving the architectural studio just before sunset, carrying rolled blueprints beneath one arm. Luca noticed the unusual seriousness on Adrian's face before either of them spoke. They entered a quiet public park overlooking the Hudson River where Adrian handed him the confidential report without saying a word. Luca slowly read every page. His expression changed from confusion to disbelief and finally to quiet anger. "You already suspected this?" he asked. Adrian nodded once. "Only this morning." Luca looked up sharply. "Then why did you ask me to trust you before knowing the truth?" Adrian hesitated. Because protecting you mattered even before I understood everything. Luca folded the report and returned it. Do not confuse protection with honesty. Adrian remained silent. Luca continued walking toward the river, trying to steady the emotions building inside him. There is something else you never told me. Adrian frowned. What do you mean? Luca held up the final page of the report. Attached to the succession agreement was another document identifying Adrian as the sole beneficiary of the Cross Family Legacy Trust, an organization controlling not only the corporation but billions of dollars in family assets through generations of carefully protected inheritance agreements. The document required every future chief executive to place the family's reputation above personal relationships whenever public scandal threatened the company. Luca lowered the papers slowly. You never fired me as only a chief executive. His voice grew quieter with every word. You fired me because you were the heir to an empire that demanded sacrifice, and I was the easiest person to lose. Adrian's eyes reflected genuine regret. I never wanted that responsibility to define me. Luca gave a faint, painful smile. But it did. For the first time since they met again, Luca stepped backward instead of closer. The distance between them felt far greater than a few feet. Everything Adrian had done suddenly carried another meaning. The expensive security, the private apartment, the effortless authority, even his calm confidence during the gala. Luca realized he had never truly understood the world Adrian belonged to, or the impossible expectations resting on his shoulders. Yet that realization offered no comfort. It only deepened the wound. You asked me to believe you, Luca said softly. Now I have discovered there was an entire part of your life you never trusted me enough to share. Adrian took one careful step forward. Luca, please listen. Luca quietly shook his head. Not today. He turned and walked away before Adrian could say another word. Hidden inside his coat pocket, his phone vibrated once more. Another anonymous message appeared. Good. Keep walking away from him. He is the only person who can expose what really happened to your child. Cold rain arrived just after sunset, turning the streets of Manhattan into shimmering ribbons of silver and gold. Luca Bennett barely noticed the weather as he walked without direction, replaying every conversation with Adrian Cross until each memory felt heavier than the last. He had convinced himself that leaving was the only way to protect both his heart and the secret growing inside him. Then another wave of dizziness stopped him in the middle of the sidewalk. He reached for the nearest street lamp, closing his eyes as the world tilted beneath him. Before he could lose his balance completely, a familiar voice quietly called his name. Luca. He looked up to find Adrian standing only a few feet away, holding a black umbrella that shielded both of them from the rain. Neither man spoke for several long seconds. The city rushed around them while they remained perfectly still. You should not be out here alone, Adrian finally said. Luca gave a tired smile that never reached his eyes. You have said that before. Because it is still true. Luca wanted to refuse the help. He wanted to walk away again. Instead, another wave of exhaustion reminded him that pride could not change reality. Adrian noticed the color had drained from Luca's face. Without making him feel trapped, he quietly guided him toward the waiting sedan parked nearby. The driver opened the rear door without a word. Adrian did not sit beside him immediately. He waited until Luca chose the seat first, allowing him to keep a sense of control that had been taken from him far too many times. During the drive, silence settled comfortably between them. Adrian finally broke it with unexpected honesty. When I was 12 years old, my grandfather told me that everyone would eventually leave if I ever appeared weak. He believed trust was expensive and loneliness was the price of leadership. Lucas slowly turned toward him. Adrian stared through the rain-covered window as though speaking to the city instead of the man beside him. Every tutor, every advisor, every board member repeated the same lesson. Never hesitate. Never apologize. Never allow emotions to influence business. His voice softened almost to a whisper. By the time I became chief executive officer, I no longer knew how to separate those rules from my own life. Luca listened quietly. This was not the confident executive who dominated boardrooms and negotiations. This was simply a man carrying expectations he had never chosen. Adrian continued after another long pause. The day I dismissed you, I believed I was protecting the company my family spent generations building. I never realized I was destroying the one person who made that company feel less empty. Luca lowered his eyes, unable to answer immediately. The words carried no dramatic promises and no excuses. They carried regret. The sedan stopped outside Luca's apartment building, but neither of them reached for the door. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows. Adrian reached into the front compartment and removed a neatly folded wool blanket the security team kept for emergencies. Without saying anything, he placed it gently across Luca's shoulders after noticing he was shivering from the cold. The small gesture felt strangely more intimate than any grand declaration could have been. "You always forget to bring a warmer coat," Adrian said with the faintest smile. Luca blinked in surprise. "You remembered that?" Adrian nodded. "You always claimed you were never cold, even in December." For the first time in weeks, Luca laughed quietly. The sound disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived, yet it changed something inside the silent car. The distance between them no longer felt impossible. Then Luca's phone vibrated once again. His smile faded as another anonymous message appeared across the screen. "Stop trusting him. The next truth will destroy both of you." Adrian noticed the fear returning to Luca's expression. He did not ask to see the message. Instead, he looked directly into Luca's eyes and spoke with calm certainty. "Whatever secret someone is trying to use against you, you will not face it alone anymore." Luca held the phone tightly, torn between revealing everything and protecting the life he carried. For one fragile moment, he wanted nothing more than to tell Adrian the truth, but the fear of losing him all over again remained stronger than hope. 3 mornings later, every major business website in America published the same explosive headline before sunrise. Grainy photographs showed Adrian Cross escorting Luca Bennett into a luxury apartment building, sharing an umbrella outside the architectural studio, and sitting together inside a quiet coffee shop. The articles claimed the former executive assistant had secretly manipulated the billionaire chief executive into restarting a personal relationship after losing his job. By 8 o'clock, social media had already decided the story was true. Anonymous accounts accused Luca of chasing wealth. Television commentators questioned his integrity. Reporters gathered outside both Cross Holdings and the design studio, waiting for someone to confirm the rumors. Luca arrived at work only to find several co-workers staring down at their phones before quickly looking away. No one insulted him directly, but the silence hurt more than words ever could. His manager quietly invited him into a private office and slid a printed document across the desk. It appeared to be a confidential relationship agreement carrying Luca's electronic signature. According to the forged contract, Luca had accepted financial benefits in exchange for pretending to develop a personal relationship with Adrian to improve the chief executive officer's public image after the recent corporate scandal. Every page looked authentic. Even the signature resembled his own. Luca felt the blood drain from his face. "This is not real," he whispered. "I have never seen this before." His manager believed him, but sympathy alone could not stop the growing public controversy. Less than an hour later, Cross Holdings announced an emergency press conference. Investors demanded answers. News helicopters circled above the headquarters. Every major financial network broadcast the event live. Luca knew exactly what would happen next. Adrian would protect the company, just as he had done before. The familiar fear settled heavily inside his chest. He quietly left the studio and walked toward the growing crowd outside Cross Holdings, unable to stop himself from hearing the truth with his own ears. Hundreds of reporters packed the entrance plaza. Camera flashes lit the gray morning like distant lightning. Victor Hale stood near the front row, wearing the same polished smile he always carried when everything unfolded according to his plan. Adrian stepped onto the platform alone. His expression remained calm, unreadable, almost painfully distant. Questions erupted from every direction. Did your former assistant manipulate you? Was the relationship staged? Did company money fund this arrangement? Adrian listened without interrupting. Then one reporter held up the forged agreement. Is this contract authentic? Silence followed. Adrian looked at the document for several long seconds without speaking. The entire plaza seemed to stop breathing. Luca stood near the back of the crowd, his heart sinking lower with every passing moment. He knew that silence. It was the same silence that had come before he lost everything in the boardroom. Memories crashed into him all at once. The accusation, the dismissal, the empty elevator, the clinic. For one terrible instant, he believed history was repeating itself. Around him, whispers spread through the crowd. Some reporters began typing breaking news alerts before Adrian had even answered. Victor Hale's satisfied expression grew almost impossible to hide. Luca lowered his eyes, preparing himself to walk away before the final humiliation arrived. Then Adrian finally raised his head. His voice remained calm, but every word carried unmistakable certainty. The document being circulated today is fraudulent. The plaza fell completely silent. Adrian continued without hesitation. Mr. Luca Bennett has never accepted compensation in exchange for a personal relationship with me. He has never manipulated me, deceived me, or exploited this company in any way. The greatest failure in this entire situation belongs to me, because I once failed to trust an honest man. Gasps spread through the crowd. Victor's confident smile disappeared instantly. Adrian stepped away from the podium and walked directly through the sea of cameras until he reached Luca. Without concern for the flashing lights surrounding them, he stopped beside him instead of in front of him, making it unmistakably clear that Luca was not standing alone. "No one," Adrian said quietly enough for Luca to hear, but loudly enough for every nearby microphone to capture, "will use my mistakes to destroy your name ever again." The plaza remained silent long after Adrian Cross stepped beside Luca Bennett. Hundreds of cameras stayed fixed on them, waiting for the next sentence that could change the story once again. Adrian looked across the crowd with the same calm confidence that had guided billion-dollar negotiations. But this time, there was something different behind his steady expression. He was no longer protecting a corporation. He was protecting a person. "There is one more thing the public deserves to know," Adrian said. A large display screen behind the podium suddenly illuminated. The company's chief legal officer walked forward carrying a secure tablet, while the director of information security joined him beside the stage. Adrian continued without raising his voice. "The document circulating online this morning did not originate from Cross Holdings. Our forensic team completed a digital authentication less than 1 hour ago. The screen filled with technical records showing timestamps, editing histories, and encrypted server logs. Every alteration pointed to the same internal account." Gasps spread through the reporters as the highlighted name appeared across the display. Victor Hale. The chief financial officer's confident smile vanished for the first time. Adrian did not look toward him immediately. Instead, he allowed the evidence to speak before he did. The electronic signature attached to the fabricated agreement was copied from archived payroll records. The metadata proves the document was created after Mr. Bennett's employment ended. It is a forgery. More files appeared on the screen. Security footage. Financial transfers between Victor's undisclosed companies. Internal messages directing anonymous leaks to reporters. Even the threatening text messages sent to Luca had been traced through disposable devices purchased by one of Victor's shell corporations. The entire pattern unfolded piece by piece with quiet precision until there was no room left for doubt. Several board members slowly turned toward Victor in disbelief. He attempted to interrupt, but Adrian calmly raised one hand. "You will have every opportunity to respond through the appropriate legal process," he said evenly. "Today is about restoring the truth." Security personnel approached Victor without creating a scene, politely requesting that he accompany them inside the building while the board initiated an emergency review. No shouting followed. No dramatic struggle. Only the unmistakable collapse of a carefully constructed lie. The attention returned to Adrian and Luca. Reporters immediately began asking a different question. If none of this was real, why did you continue protecting him? Adrian turned toward Luca before answering. For several quiet seconds, neither man spoke. Luca searched Adrian's face, uncertain where this moment would lead. Adrian finally smiled with a sincerity no press conference could manufacture. "At first, I believed I was correcting a terrible mistake I had made as a leader," he said. "I offered protection because I thought it was my responsibility." He paused, drawing a slow breath. "Some people may still believe every appearance we made together was only part of damage control. They are free to believe that if they choose." The crowd waited. Adrian's next words arrived with complete certainty. What began as responsibility became respect. Respect became trust. Trust became something I was too afraid to admit until I almost lost it forever. He looked directly at Luca. "My concern for him is no longer an obligation. It is real." The words settled over the plaza with unexpected warmth. Luca felt every emotion he had spent weeks hiding rise at once. He remembered the boardroom, the rain, the quiet blanket inside the car, the apology that carried no excuses, and the man who had chosen truth over reputation in front of the entire world. Adrian took one careful step closer, stopping only when Luca did not move away. "I cannot erase what I did," Adrian said softly. "But if you ever decide to trust me again, I will spend every day proving that choice was worth making." Reporters lowered their microphones almost instinctively, sensing they were witnessing something far more meaningful than another corporate statement. Luca's eyes glistened, but he did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached forward and gently straightened Adrian's slightly crooked tie, a familiar habit from countless mornings before everything had fallen apart. The simple gesture drew quiet smiles from people throughout the crowd. At that exact moment, Luca felt a sudden wave of lightheadedness stronger than any before. His hand instinctively moved toward his abdomen before he caught himself. Adrian noticed the movement immediately. Confusion flickered across his face as concern replaced every other emotion. Luca realized with a racing heart that the secret he had guarded for so long might not remain hidden much longer. The moment Luca Bennett's hand rested protectively against his abdomen, Adrian Cross noticed the movement, but instead of asking questions in front of hundreds of cameras, he quietly removed his suit jacket and draped it around Luca's shoulders once more. "We are finished here," Adrian said calmly before turning toward the reporters. "The investigation will continue through the proper legal process. Today has already answered the only question that truly mattered." Without waiting for another round of questions, Adrian walked beside Luca toward the waiting sedan. This time, Luca did not hesitate before matching his pace. Neither man reached for the other, yet the distance between them had quietly disappeared. News cameras captured the image of them leaving together, not as a chief executive and his former employee, but as two people choosing to face the future side by side. The following week changed everything. Cross Holdings officially cleared Luca's name, restored every professional record connected to his employment, and publicly acknowledged that the evidence used to dismiss him had been fabricated. Victor Hale resigned after the board completed its independent review, while the company introduced new transparency policies designed to prevent another abuse of authority. Adrian accepted responsibility for his own decisions before shareholders, explaining that leadership without humility was simply another form of failure. The statement surprised financial analysts, but it earned something far more valuable than approval. It earned trust. A few days later, Adrian invited Luca to the executive conference room where their story had first fallen apart. The long walnut table remained exactly as Luca remembered it, but the atmosphere felt completely different. No board members waited inside. No lawyers. No investors. Only two folders rested side by side beneath the morning sunlight. Adrian slid one toward Luca. "This is not an employment contract," he said quietly. Luca opened the folder and smiled with surprise. Instead of legal obligations or corporate policies, the document contained a partnership proposal for a charitable design foundation supporting young artists and students who could not afford creative education. Adrian had already signed every page except one. "You once told me that buildings should give people hope before they impress them," Adrian said. "I never forgot." Luca looked up, unable to hide the emotion in his eyes. "You remembered that conversation?" Adrian laughed softly. "I remembered all of them." Luca signed the final page without another word. Adrian then reached into his jacket and produced a small silver key, the same one Luca had refused weeks earlier. "The apartment is still available," Adrian said. "Not because I want to hide you there. Because I hope it can become a place where you always feel safe. Whether you choose to stay for one evening or much longer will always be your decision." Luca closed Adrian's fingers gently around the key before smiling. "Then let us begin somewhere even simpler." Adrian looked at him with quiet curiosity. Luca slowly reached for Adrian's hand in full view of the office windows overlooking Manhattan. "Walk me home." Adrian nodded without hesitation. "I would like that." As they left the conference room together, Luca finally stopped halfway down the hallway. His heart beat faster than it had during any board meeting or press conference. He knew the moment had come. He turned toward Adrian and placed one of the medical appointment envelopes into his hands. Adrian opened it carefully. His eyes moved across the report once before widening with disbelief. Then they returned to Luca, shining with emotion that words could not immediately express. Luca smiled through tears he no longer tried to hide. "You once said I would never have to face the truth alone," he whispered. "Now it is time for us to face it together." Adrian's voice trembled for the first time since Luca had ever known him. "You mean?" Luca answered with a quiet nod. Adrian did not speak again. He simply wrapped both hands around Luca's with extraordinary care, as though protecting the future they had almost lost forever. Together they stepped into the elevator, the doors closing gently behind them as the city waited below, and for the first time neither of them was walking away from the other, but toward a life they were finally brave enough to build together.